But anyway, we're in the story. This is week number 2 of this 31-week series, and so there's a story Bible, and we would like for every person who would like one to get one. And so if you have $5, you can pick one up. If you don't have $5, you just take one, and that's fine too. But what we want to do is help you understand God's big story told chronologically. So that's what this series is about, to help you step in and get the big picture of God. And in finding God's upper story, you can discover your lower story. You've received a guide today when you walked in. There's a small group guide to help you continue having a conversation at home, or maybe you're in a small group, or maybe you just like to talk this stuff over with a friend at work. I know we always do that, right? Anyway, and then there's, of course, the prayer list and stuff on the back. But we began last week in the garden, which is typically where you begin when you talk about in the beginning, right? You talk about the Garden of Eden. The Garden of Eden was the first temple in the Bible. Now, it wasn't a temple with a building. A temple means that God's presence is there and man's presence is there together, and they're overlapping. And so the Garden of Eden was a beautiful place. Apparently there was some type of area where God would inhabit and Adam would inhabit, the divine creatures would inhabit, and they dwelt together. But Adam and Eve, as you know the story, made a choice, disobeyed God, didn't trust God, and because of that, sin entered the world and broke the universe. We live in a broken universe. Some of you already know that. And then we also talked about a little bit about Cain and Abel and how the earth continued to spiral into sin. We talked about Noah and how Noah built an ark. And in doing so, he rescued humanity. But Noah, one of the most righteous men on the earth, maybe the most righteous man on the earth at that time, he built a new garden. And in that garden, he had a vineyard. And instead of just drinking a glass of wine, he must have drank a bunch of wine because he got drunk and something terrible happened, and it just began the spiral downward as well. So here's what we learned last week, that God is going to redeem man through himself, not through our righteousness. And that's good news. In Genesis chapter 11, so the book of Genesis chapter 11 is sort of like where you would open up to the middle of the book, if you can imagine that. Genesis chapter 11 is the middle of Genesis, and there's about 1,000 years of history that the story Bible does not cover. And in that 1,000 years of history, there's a story called the Tower of Babel. And what happened is mankind all spoke one language, and they developed some new technology they called the brick. And they got a bunch of bricks, and they made a big tower, and they thought they were God. And God came down and confused their languages and scattered them over the whole earth. And so now we have many people groups divided by language. And that's when we pick up this story today, where God will begin to build a brand new nation called Israel through one man named Abraham. God will bring a rescue to the cosmos through one man, which is pretty phenomenal. And through this nation that will become, through his lineage, the nation of Israel, he will reveal his presence, his power, and his plan to bring us back. And so God will build a nation. Now, about genealogy, there is a diagram I'd like to show you, and this is to help you understand how we get to Jesus, and just a little bit. So through Abraham, we'll have the son Isaac, right, who the promised Messiah will come through Isaac. And then Isaac has 2 sons, Jacob and Esau, but the promised one who will have the son will be Jacob, and there will come a nation. And so from these people, we have a nation born. Jacob has 12 sons. And as we move down the genealogical funnel, if you will, one of the sons of Jacob is Judah. And so Judah, from that tribe will come the Messiah. And so we figured this out by the prophecies that were given in the Old Testament. And then from Judah, that tribe, we have one who comes from that tribe, David. And so King David, the second king of Israel, we know that he is going to have the Messiah come through his lineage. And so we have a house. And then we come to Jesus, the God-man, eventually through Mary. So here's what I'm trying to say. We start out with a nation, we move to a tribe, we come to a house, and then we come to a family. If Jesus isn't the Messiah, there cannot even be another option. Like, He is it. And so we had to have confidence. And so God's going to begin restoring all of this through this grand design nation through Abraham. Abraham comes from Ur of Chaldees. My dog knows one Bible name. Whenever he sees the mailman, my dog goes, Ur. And that's where Abraham comes from. Now, that stupid joke, you got something down, right? You can impress your friends. And in this place, in this Ur of Chaldees, Abraham will receive this staggering call and promise of God. The Lord said to Abraham, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. And I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you I will curse, and all the peoples of the earth will be blessed through you." This is the first time he hears this grand promise and also calling in his life. So notice that this test of faith begins him walking away from his country in his golden years. Now, a lot of us sort of kind of plan into retirement, getting our house in order, our finances in order, and thinking about what we might do and how we're kind of just at a place of rest and kind of coasting out the rest of our life in some type of comfort, right? But Abraham is 75 years old when he gets this call. So imagine, God calls you to leave everything you know, your hometown, your family, all your businesses, whatever he was involved in. Leave all that and go to a place where I'm asking you to go. Abraham might say to God, "Hey, God, where am I going?" He says, "I'll show you." "Well, can I get an address? I need to put it in my GPS." No, I'll show you along the way. Just go, "Well, how am I going to eat?" I'll take care of that." "Well, how am I going to protect my wife?" "Well, just trust me." I mean, it's just amazing when we think about this call in his life. So also notice in this passage of Scripture, there's a personal promise that God gives to Abraham. "I will bless you." There's a national promise where he says, "I will make you a great nation." And then there's an international promise. All the peoples of the earth will be blessed through you. It's a pretty grand promise when you think about it. There are 3 major world religions that exist today. Well, there might be others, but I'm talking about Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. And all 3 major religions still use Abraham in their prayers. I mean, that's pretty phenomenal that this guy, right? And so we know this promise has fulfillment because we're living among the people that it is affecting. And so along with this test of faith, though, God also puts a hedge of protection. And he says, "Those who bless you, I will bless, and those who curse you, I will curse." Now, I am not a Zionist. By that I mean, I'm not all about somehow the nation of Israel plays some big role in the return of Jesus. It may or may not. I don't know. The end times is not my forte. I'm just saying that when we think about Israel today, right, we should respect them and honor them because God used them to bring about Messiah. Is there any other way to the Messiah except through Jesus? No. They're not special in any other way more than us, but they're unique in that God raised up this nation to bring about a Messiah. And so from that fact alone, I think we ought to honor them and respect their heritage. And so that's all I'll say about that. But when we talk about nation building, God's going to build a nation, right, through Abraham. We talk about nation building. America, the United States of America, knows a little bit about nation building and the difficulty, right? We've been trying to do this in Iraq, we've been trying to do this in Afghanistan, and it's very difficult. It's a real challenge to bring order and justice to a nation in chaos and war. And so if we were going to take on such a grand task, wouldn't we choose the best and the brightest to make that happen? And the answer is yes, of course. We would look for the best candidates possible to pull that off. But God chose the most unlikely people to bring about this great nation.
There once was a man named Abram, who was a descendant of Noah. God told him to move with his wife Sarai, an entire family away from where they lived. God made a promise. I will make you into a great nation and bless you, and all of the people on earth will be blessed through you. So Abram and his family left. At one point, they stopped and God told him to look around. All the land that you see, I will give to you and your children. Then, one night, God took Abram outside. Look up and count the stars. This is the number of children you will have. But Abram was already 75 years old, and Sarai was way too old to have children. So they decided that Sarai's servant Hagar should have Abram's child. Hagar became pregnant and gave birth to a son named Ishmael. Yet God told Abram again, "You will be the father of many nations." God changed their names to Abraham and Sarah and promised that it would be through Sarah that God's blessing would come. Exactly as God promised, Sarah became pregnant, giving birth to a son named Isaac. When Isaac was still a young boy, God told Abraham to take his son up on a mountain and sacrifice him. Abraham took Isaac, laid him on an altar, and took out his knife to kill him. But an angel stopped Abraham, and God provided a ram to sacrifice in place of Isaac. Years later, Abraham and Sarah died and left everything they owned to Isaac. Isaac married and had twin sons, Jacob and Esau. Esau was Isaac's favorite, and as the oldest, he was set to gain his father's inheritance. But Jacob wanted the inheritance, so he came up with a scheme to trick his father, who was now old and blind, into promising it to him. He dressed in Esau's clothes and put animal skin on his hands, because Esau's hands were very hairy. Confused, Isaac gave his blessing to Jacob and promised him the inheritance instead of Esau. This caused a huge fight, one that almost ended in murder before they went their own ways. Thankfully, they reunited, and God promised to bless Jacob's family. Jacob had 12 sons of his own, and like his father and grandfather before him, Jacob had a favorite son. Little did Jacob know that his favoritism would put his son, Joseph, in danger of being killed by his own brothers.
A summary of chapter 2 in the story. God will use an unlikely person, Abraham, to build a nation. He chose the most likely person to rescue the world with Noah, the most righteous person, but that didn't work out. So God's going to choose the most unlikely person, and this is to illustrate that salvation will come by means that we never expected it to come by. The Bible doesn't ever say that Abraham worshiped God. We know from Genesis 24 and from the archaeological digs done in the area of Ur, done in the area south of Iraq, that this was a very idolatrous place. There were many idols buried deep in the earth, knowing that this culture was steeped in idolatry. Abraham's dad was an idol worshiper. We know that as well. And so, why would God trust someone like this to bring about salvation? Couldn't he find a better guy? But even stranger than this elderly couple were way beyond the age of having children. He chose an elderly couple that were infertile to build a nation. We would choose, if it was you and I, and we were sitting in God's space, right? And we get to make the choice. We would choose like this young, vibrant couple. Just, they look like they just stepped out of a glamour photo or something, and they're on paddle boards, but going across the lake, right? This is like, a sandals commercial or something, the resort. No, what God does, instead of choosing two young people with paddle boards, he chooses two old people with canes. And he brings about this nation. And so God will do this over and over again. God uses broken people to fulfill His unbreakable promises. Abraham was old, Sarah was childless. Isaac, their son, was insecure. His son Jacob was a cheater. Leah was unattractive. Naomi was a widow. Joseph was a slave. Moses stuttered. Gideon was fearful. Samson was proud. Rahab was immoral. David had an affair. Elijah was suicidal. Jeremiah was constantly dealing with depression. Jonah was disobedient. Mary was a poor teenage girl. John the Baptist was over the top in so many ways. Can I get an amen? Peter was impulsive. Martha worried. The woman at the well had 5 failed marriages. Paul struggled with his past, and he was poor in health. And Timothy was absolutely timid. Why would God use the most unlikely people to create His story? Because God uses broken people in His story to strengthen our faith in Him. We could add into that statement, for His glory. But He's constantly using broken people, the people we would never suspect, so that we might trust Him in every aspect and area of our life. When God began this church, Cornerstone, He chose a group of people who had been through a discouraging church split, a divided church. Why? For His glory and our faith. God chose a man to be a preacher. That would be me. All right, just for a moment. Just talk about me. Why would He choose a person like me who was deeply broken by divorce and sin? Because God is going to do things for His glory and for our trust and faith in Him. When we sent out our first 2 people to dedicate a church that we donated the monies to build in India, God chose a judge who'd just been through divorce, who was recovering from that, and a recovered alcoholic. That's who God sent. When He raised up our first missionaries to go serve on mercy ships, a floating hospital on the west coast of Africa, He chose a brother and sister from Chalk Level Road. All right? You getting it? When He needed a missionary to go to Australia, He raised up a young man from a home, a single mom home, who struggled with all kinds of things. When she first walked in there, I'll never remember her. I always remember her struggles and what she faced. And she would have never thought that her son would be sent off to do church work in Australia. When God needed a children's minister, He raised up a single mom who had been broken through life's experiences to help children who come from all types of families, including those who are broken. When God raised up a student minister, the current one we have now, He chose a young man who had been through some very discouraging church experiences, who was just about ready to give up on church completely. I love it. I love it. God uses broken people in His story to strengthen our faith in Him. And you're walking in here and you're like, God can't use me. You have no idea what God can do through broken people. And when we think about this nationally, when we think about the church more universal, when God wanted a national prison minister, He chose an ex-con named Colson, who was all tied up in the Watergate scandal. When God wanted to teach us about joy, He chose a former Olympic diving athlete, Joni Eareckson Tada, who broke her name and became a lifelong quadriplegic. I got a question. Who's God raising up right here, right now, from this group to do the most unexpected things? It's one of you. It really is. Whoever it is, they'll be the most unlikely candidate. Whoever it is will have a very broken past. Whoever it is, it will be for God's glory and our faith. God chose the foolish things, Paul says, of the world to shame the wise. God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. God chose the lowly things of this world and the despised things and the things that are not to nullify the things that are, so that no one may boast before him. It is because of him that you are in Christ Jesus, who has become for us wisdom from God. That is our righteousness, holiness, and redemption. Therefore, as it is written, let the one who boasts, boast in the Lord. The reason you go to work is because God put breath in your lungs. The reason you have children is because God brought that into your life. And sometimes you might question that one. But anyway, joke. Abraham's story is more likely a story of the most unlikely choice to build a nation, and it is an explanation of what the word faith is. It's not only an explanation, but it's an illustration of the word faith. If you want to describe faith in a story, you just look to Abraham, and you'll see a definition of faith. By faith, Abraham, when he was called to go to a place he would later receive his inheritance, the Hebrew writer says, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. Faith is obeying God when you don't know where you're going. Like it really is, like you just trust him. Abraham's faith in God grew much like ours. There were times that were highs and lows. I mean, Abraham lied twice about his wife. You know, Abraham was called out of Ur of Chaldees. Ur of Chaldees means destruction, a place of destruction. And he left there, but he took along his nephew Lot. He wasn't supposed to do that. Lot will cause him all kinds of heartache. After arriving in Canaan land, there's a famine, right? He goes to Canaan land like God shows him, but a famine comes. He gets nervous. He's going to wonder how he's going to feed his family, so he goes to Egypt. When he goes to Egypt, he runs into two kings that think his 75-year-old wife is hot. I mean, she must have been amazing, right? I don't know what she was eating, but I don't know. Maybe there's something about figs and fresh water. I don't know. But anyway, the point is, he's like, hey, king. And the king says, hey, that's a hot girl standing beside you. Yeah, she's my sister. I can imagine the conversation when they got back together after that one. Woo! That must have been a bad night for Abraham. He washed a lot of bowls that night. Anyway, Abraham he has these moments of failing and then moments of success. Sarah gets nervous about having children and God's promises to that. And so she says, hey, honey, why don't you sleep with my handmaiden Hagar? And he goes, okay. And he walks into the most stupid decision that he made, and it still causing problems today. But here's the thing. God does not focus on your momentary failures. God is playing the long game in everyone's life here today. And so he's for us. I love what Paul says in Romans 8. He is for us. He is not against us. Man, if you grew up in a church where God was scary and they were yelling at them, I'm sorry. You went to the wrong church, right? That was the wrong message. God is for us, not against us, even when we fail. And so here's what we need to understand. Faith implies obedience, trust, and confidence in God's direction. Like, do not buy in to a very common explanation of belief or faith that exists in the Western world today. And that is, well, I believe in God. Okay, belief is part of faith, but that's not what faith is. Faith in God implies obedience, like you're going to do what he asks you to do. You're going to trust, and you're going to have confidence that he's going to complete the plan that he's working in your life. And so in Romans 4, Paul writes about Abraham, and he says, even when there was no reason for hope, Abraham kept hoping, believing that he would become the father of many nations. Even when it seemed impossible that God was going to do this, he kept believing, and that was credited to him as his righteousness, even when it didn't make sense to trust God. And that's what faith is. This next will illustrate what I'm talking about.
Jesus, I just don't trust you.
You don't trust me?
No, I mean, I want to trust you. I just don't.
I have an exercise that I think will really help you.
Oh, okay.
Stand here and face this direction. Now, do you trust me?
No, I just said I don't trust you.
All right, well, this is all part of the exercise.
Oh,
all right?
right, okay.
Whenever I ask you if you trust me, you say, yes, Jesus, I trust you.
Even though I don't.
It's practice.
Okay.
So, do you trust me?
Yes, Jesus, I trust you.
Now, fall back.
Are you gonna catch me?
Don't worry about that part.
Okay, that's the part I'm worried about.
You can do this, okay? Just trust me.
Trust you.
Fall back.
Okay, well, Jesus, I trust
Good.
you. Yes, I do trust you. I'm gonna fall
Okay.
back. Woo!
Okay.
That's great.
Let's try this again. Just face this direction and keep your feet planted. All right? Do you trust me?
Yes, Jesus, I trust you.
Now, fall back.
Okay, I'm gonna do it.
All right.
I'm really gonna do it. Okay.
Good.
Oh, Jesus, you really caught me! I didn't think you were gonna catch me, but you did!
Oh, that was great!
That was great!
You're ready for level 2.
Level 2, here
Yes.
I come, baby! Woo! Whoa!
Okay, hold it.
Oh, you know what? You're too close. You need to move back.
Ah, right.
Okay.
This one's a little bit different, Laura.
Okay.
Stand here,
Uh-huh.
but face me.
Oh, forward fall. I
Okay.
can do that.
Wait.
Whoa.
Okay, wait for my signal.
Oh, right, the Jesus signal.
Yes, the Jesus signal. Do you trust me?
Yes, Jesus, I trust you so much.
Good. Fall back.
That's awesome.
It is awesome, especially when you do it.
Seriously?
Of course.
Okay, Jesus, I don't know if you noticed this, but there is nobody over there.
I know it looks that way to you.
Looks that way. It is that way.
You can do this, Laura. Just trust me and fall back.
Jesus, I can't do that.
We can do it together.
I can't.
You can.
I won't.
And many times, that's how faith works in our life. We trust Jesus at the beginning levels. Maybe there's a crisis in your life and you pray and God brings some remedy, some person, some alleviation of the pain in your life, and you're like, man, that's great. I prayed and God answered my prayer. And then the crisis is a little bit bigger. You know, a divorce, doctor's report, financial loss, whatever it might be. Kids are having problems, real problems. And then we're like, God's like, I need you to continue to trust me. You continue to do what I've told you to do. Stay in my word. Stay on your knees in prayer. Stay with God's people. Don't give up. And we're like, man, I don't know if I can trust you on this one. You don't seem to be answering my needs. I've seen it happen when it comes to finances. I'm really surprised the amount of people who haven't made the commitment to tithe and be generous in their lifestyle. They live their lives as if their financial needs are all up to them. Man, God gives us a better way. He says, trust me. Trust me. Honor me in the first 10% of your life and see what I can do. That doesn't make sense. I don't think I can work this out. It's like, well, okay. When you're ready to trust me, you'll finally be ready to live without carrying that burden all on your own. Comes to relationships like singleness. I was single for 7 years after my first marriage, after the divorce. And it was really difficult to wait on God. But when I finally learned the lesson that God was enough, that I didn't have to have somebody to feel like I was somebody, that's when God brought Marie into my life. Maybe it's like your kids are rebellious, adult children maybe, and they're off the reservation. Or somebody you love is just like so far gone, and you're like, God, what do I do? God says, trust me. Your job is to pray. Your job is to be faithful. See what I can do. Amen. Following God, I'm just going to tell you, many times does not make sense. It seems foolish. It even seems ridiculous. But God's like, it's only when you trust me that you're going to see the biggest miracles and works of all. God called Abe to trust him. Abraham, here am I, he replied. Then God said, take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there on a burnt offering on a mountain. I will show you. The mountain I will show you. Early the next morning, Abraham got up and loaded his donkey, and he took with him 2 of his servants and his son Isaac. And when he had cut enough wood for the burnt offering, he set out for the place that God had told him to go. Sacrifice your son, that I miraculously gave you. That's more than an odd request, all right? That's a crazy request that God gives Abraham. But the problem that we have is we're always limiting God from our perspective. Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount, he says, here's what you need to do. You need to view life from God's eye and not your eyes. It's called a single focus. And so God wants us to try and see the world through His sovereign hands, not through our limited abilities. And so it does seem ridiculous. From Abraham's point of view, sacrificing his son is just stupid. But he does it because he has learned to trust God. God told Noah, hey, build an ark, build a boat, a big boat in a desert. And everybody laughed at him. But he did it. Jesus said to the people who were listening to him one day, he says, I want you to love your enemies. You mean that teacher that talked bad about me in the teacher's lounge? Yeah, I want you to love her or him. You mean that guy that stepped on my shoulders and got ahead of me at work? Yeah, I want you to love him. You mean my ex that cheated on me and just messed me up financially? Yep. I want you to love him. Wow. How in the world? And God would say, it's not in the world. How in God? Yes, more than able. It seems ridiculous and confusing, but when our lower story find connection to God's upper story, amazing things happen. Abraham said to his servant, stay here with the donkey, and I and the boy will go over there, and we will worship, which means sacrifice, and we will come back to you. He had all this confidence that he might kill his son, but God was going to raise him back up. He did it once, he can do it again. And so, here's the thing. Faith is trusting God even when it doesn't make sense. I'm just telling you, if you're going to walk this walk with Jesus, you're going to have moments where it just seems ridiculous to do what He asks you to do. But that's where our lives really begin to be transformed, in those moments of crisis and trusting the Lord. And so Abraham did what God instructed him to do, and they went up, and his son, we don't know how old Isaac was, but he was a teenager at least, and he might have been a young adult, so somewhere between 15 and 25, we think. Isaac could have prevented his dad from tying him up and getting on the altar. And there's another little sub-story of faith there. Isaac's like, yep, tie me up. And he lays down on the altar. And so just about when Abraham's getting ready to plunge the knife, we hear this word from the angel of the Lord. Abraham, Abraham, here am I. He replied, do not lay a hand on the boy. He said, do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son. And Abraham looked up, and there was a thicket, and he saw a ram caught by its horns. He went over there, he took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering instead of a son. So Abraham called that place, the Lord will provide. And to this day, it is said on that mountain of the Lord, it will be provided. Now that was written many years before Jesus was born. And that place, that area of Moriah, is the very place that Jesus would be crucified. And so in the Bible, there are different literary tools used, and one of them is called foreshadowing. And it's when there's an event in the Old Testament that's pointing to Jesus. And so this event is pointing to Jesus. That one day God will put another son, and He won't stay His hand, and the knife or the nails will plunge deeply into His hands and His feet, and a sword in His side, and He will die for the sins of humanity. It's called foreshadowing. And so there are times in our lives where events are taking place, and we have a tendency to think it's about us because we think the universe rotates around us. But really, sometimes there are events taking our life, and it is about our situation. But sometimes God is staging in our lives for some future event we don't even know about. Something way bigger than us. And so we have to understand God's playing a long game, not just in our life, but in the whole world's existence, right? And so trust God, because there might be an event in your life that's foreshadowing some future event. Have faith in God because He uses broken people like us to fulfill His promises. God used Abraham to be the father of faith, even though Abraham disobeyed when he took Lot, even though Abraham left the promised land when the famine came, even though Abraham lied twice, God used Abraham. Many of us wrestle with the gap between our weakness and our dreams, between who we are and who God says we're meant to be. We feel unqualified. Can I get a witness? We feel unqualified to do God's work. Hey, can you serve in children's ministry? Mm-mm. Hey, can you sing on stage? Mm-mm. But I sing like a mad dog in my car in my shower. You ought to hear me. But can I sing to the Lord in front of people? Mm-mm. Right? Hey, can you go over there and spend some time with this person who's brand new to faith and do it Bible? Hey, can you talk to your coworker? No, we don't talk about faith or politics in our job. No. All right. So, we have these moments all the time where God is challenging us to trust Him. We feel unqualified. That's the beginning point for serving the Lord, is to feel totally unqualified. Good. We finally got to the point where you're not trusting in you and you're trusting in me. Now watch what I can do. God has a way of using our weakness for good. In fact, God loves to use broken people like me and like you to fulfill the greatest promises that mankind needs. Let's pray.
Thank you for joining us. You can find us on the web at cornerstonechatham.org.